Welcome, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to show you one resource first that I haven't sent out yet, but I will. I think I forgot to attach it on the last one. But this is the educators resource from the Palmer Museum, and it has a lot of clickable links. Just about everything you tap on is going to be a link to something that you can watch or listen to or flip through. There's a video links, and a lot of the artists have videos of their process. So if you're curious how somebody made something, look there. I'm also working on another document of links to things like that, so you can understand if it's like a new process you haven't heard about before. You'll be able to watch a video on how that's done. So some of these are programs that the Palmer Museum had, and if you click on that, it just takes you to the Zoom page that says the registration is no longer available. So I am going to be looking on their website for recordings of those programs, and if they are available, I'll share them. But I just wanted you to see what that document looked like so you could look, especially for those video links. Okay. And now I'm going to pull up my presentation. All right, so Global Asia's Contemporary Asian and Asian American Art from the collections of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation. It's a really long title. It's fine to just call it Global Asia's if you'd like. But it'll be up January 28th through April 24th. So a little bit about the exhibition. It's going to be in both galleries on the second floor. There are 15 artists who are either Asian or Asian American. That's of Asian descent, but they claim America as their home. And then 45 works of art, give or take one or two. Sometimes they're grouped together as one, and then other times in the materials they're separated, so just keep that in mind. And then lots of different media. So the Jordan D. Schnitzer collection focuses a lot on printmaking. So you'll see a lot of different types of printmaking as we go through, as well as collage and mixed media, painting, ceramics, sculpture, and photography. Here we go. So why is this from the collection of Jordan D. Schnitzer and his Family Foundation? Well, he is one of the largest print collectors in the U.S. and has built up quite a contemporary art collection over the past few decades. And it started out with his parents who started collecting art and passed that on to him, that desire to collect art. So all the works are either from the collection of Jordan D. Schnitzer, the Jordan Schnitzer Family Foundation, or the Arlene and Harold Schnitzer collection, who were his parents. So he started collecting prints and multiples around 1988. And then today the collection exceeds 19,000 works and includes many of today's most important contemporary artists. And he and his family generously lend works from the collection to qualified institutions and has organized over 110 exhibitions and has art exhibitions at over 160 museums. And he really likes to consider this an educational collection. So kind of like when the Docent collection came, that's a private collection that they lend to museums and galleries in order to educate the public on art and share this almost like a public art collection. So this is Mr. Schnitzer, and he will be coming in mid-February for our special opening and a special docent lunch. So I hope as many of you who can will attend that. So he got his start in real estate and investment. So he has quite a range of uh, multi-tenant office space, multifamily, and rental properties in 6 Western states. So he is he's actually, if you look him up, his financials, he is considered a billionaire. And so it's very nice that he invests that into art and education as well. So for him, he seems to have always grown up with art and feels that it's an essential part of waking up every morning and being surrounded by art and creativity to create beauty in life. So, Global Asia's Contemporary Asian and Asian American Art, the exhibition is guest curated by Dr. Chang Tan, and she is the assistant professor of art history and Asian studies at Penn State. So that's why the Palmer Museum is involved, because they are part of the Pennsylvania State University campus. And the exhibition will go on tour across the US this year, and KMA is actually the second stop right after the Palmer. And so that's why we have a lot of resources from the Palmer Museum, and you'll hear me reference that quite a bit. So, part of the docent training that they put together, I emailed you all out the packet, and I will also post that on the docent blog so that you have it along with all the links. But they did a virtual tour, and this one's not like a walk through the galleries tour. It's you click on the whole thing that says enter, and it takes you to some writing that you can read about the show. And then as you click through, there are short videos about the exhibition or about particular artists or works. So I highly encourage you to do that as part of the preparation. So other resources, we'll have links on the docent blogs to most of this stuff so that you can get to it easily. There is a printed gallery guide that will be in the galleries, and we also have a family guide that I think we're going to print as well. So I showed you the video links. There's a great little interview about community voices that where the Palmer brought in local community voices from their Asian community. And we are getting our local Asian community involved with our community day in March. And the folks from the Asian Cultural Center of Tennessee and the Asia Festival Group are helping me put that program together. So I'm excited about that. And we will need docents in the galleries for that. So you can sign up for an hour or 2 hour shift and talk to people about the artwork during the program. Okay. One of the documents I sent out was the docent preparation guide, which is a really nice little handout. And it just talks about, how to prepare. It even gives you an example of a tour intro, which I thought was really helpful, and example discussion questions on a few of the artists. And then it explains the themes a little bit and gives you good examples. I hope you can't hear the I think somebody's cutting down a tree behind my place, so I hope you can't hear that. They're kind of noisy. So definitely read through that. It's a short little document that really gives you some good pointers. So the themes, we have 3 major themes for the exhibition, but before I go through those, I just wanted to read this little section in the docent prep paper about global Asias and why we call it Global Asias. So the exhibition uses Global Asias as a conceptual framework to explore Asia not as a physical place on a map, but rather as an imaginative space of projection. So the term Asia has long served as a way to mark a set of contrasts and distinctions that demarcate East from West. And in focusing on the conceptual dimensions of Asia and in thinking about Asia not in singular but plural terms, the Global Asias encourages recognition of the power of imagination in producing Asia as a site of meaning. And finally, Global Asia's focuses our attention on migration and movement and allows us to highlight the Asian diaspora and emphasize the ways in which culture is continually invented and reinvented as part of ongoing process of travel and contact. So basically, it's called Global Asias to kind of, instead of thinking of it just as a place, but think of it as like a people and a concept of being, and how those experiences can be felt all over the world, no matter where somebody ends up living. Their heritage and their life experiences will direct what they produce art-wise, creatively, and in their thinking. So I hope that makes sense. It was a little bit wordy from my perspective, but I think if you read through that, it'll kind of solidify that we're talking about the conceptual framework to explore Asia not as a physical place on a map, but as an imaginative space of projection. So, going on to themes, we have exuberant forms, moving stories, and Asia's reinvented. And so, as we look through the works, I'm going to have them divided up into these categories so that when you see the work, you'll already know what category we're talking about. So, Exuberant Forms features works that reshape and challenge conventional views of abstract art by exploring new materials, techniques, and metaphors. And then the next one, Moving Stories, encourages viewers to reflect on the experiences of migration, both within Asia and beyond. And then Asia's Reinvented highlights works that transform styles and motifs of traditional Asian art to engage, probe, and critique contemporary popular culture and politics. So, exuberant forms. So, in this section, we're going to focus on how works have been reshaped and challenge the conventional views of abstract art with new materials and techniques and metaphors. So, some of you all might remember Kwang Young-chun. He's a Korean-born artist, and we had a show of his, I believe, in 2011, which I put a link to on your resource page that I'll send out. And our pieces that we had were his actual three-dimensional works that he had wrapped the little triangle squares in the newsprint like they did for apothecaries and pharmacies in Korea when he was growing up. This is not one of the 3D pieces like what we had. This is a print, and it's a mixographia print, which we'll talk about with some of the other artists as well. But it actually uses paper pulp to build up the surface and make it like a topographical map in a way. So, and there are video links about mixographia. So another artist who uses that same process, which it looks totally different, is Jacob Hashimoto. He is born in America, but of Japanese descent. And his works relate a lot to kites, which is kind of a fun concept. He's got all these little like hexagon and 8 and 6-sided, and sorry, I'm losing my words here. So all these kites, and these are fairly small prints, but he uses that same mixographia print where there's parts that they look like they're coming off the page, but they're still part of the print. And I think this is one we're really going to have to like see in person. But he also uses a little bit of collaging because there's push pins and other particles that stick out from the surface of the page. But his background is in making larger 3-dimensional kites, and then he translates this into his printmaking and collage work. And he does smaller scale as well as large scale. And his little prints that he puts on the kite shapes and other elements in his other works. This one on the left with the grid pattern called Hashimoto Index 1, those are the proofs of those prints. And so he actually took these wood block print proofs and put them together to make a new artwork. So you may see some repeating patterns in some of the other pieces, but it's kind of neat to see like nothing goes to waste. He takes even the parts where he's practicing and turns them into a finished art piece. And this one on the right, I think we're going to have to see it in person, but that part that looks like tape and stuff is on the edges is actually part of the printmaking process, that mixographia, and the strings as well as part of that printmaking process. So some of you might be familiar with Jun Kaneko. We had a show back in, I think, 2007 with his work, and this is a little bit different. You're probably used to seeing sculptures from him, but the one on the top is a glazed raku ceramic slab. And so he's taking this concept of how the freedom and the use of raku is used in ceramics, and is doing more of like an example that goes on the wall. It's about 1 inch or 2 thick, but for the most part it is flat, whereas when he uses it in his other work, he definitely does 3-dimensional, and you'll see some of those pieces later on. But this is his form of abstraction. So again, the exuberant forms are talking about using abstract concepts, but with new materials, or reinventing it with old materials. So the one below is Dinh Q Lê, and he is a Vietnamese American artist, and this one is called Untitled Coca-Cola, and the media just says chromogenic print and linen tape. But what this artist actually does is he takes large-scale photographs and cuts them apart and weaves them together. And of course, the tape would be used on the back to hold it together. But he uses a weaving process that his aunt taught him. It's a traditional a grass mat weaving process from Vietnam. So it's kind of interesting how he pulls together these modern and contemporary images, um, and then recreates them in this traditional weaving pattern of his heritage. And I don't know how well you can see that, but if you notice the word Coca-Cola, and of course that's the name of the piece as well, Untitled Coca-Cola. But what this represents is it's a critique of consumerism and cultural and consumer culture and imperialism. And the image itself is from, let me see if it says which. Doesn't give me the exact image it is, but this is one that has like scenes of the Vietnam War is the actual image, but then the Coca-Cola is on top of that. And he talks about how the Vietnam War and the pop culture artistic movement all came about around the same time and were happening simultaneously in the world. So on the one hand, you've got this focus on consumerism and very peppy, almost vapid art focus, whereas there's something very serious going on in the world with wars. And he grew up during the Vietnam War, so he was very influenced by this. And he actually didn't immigrate to the US until the late 70s. So we'll see more of his work as we go through this as well. So moving on with the idea of abstraction, we have Hiroki. Oh, I looked up how to say his last name and now I've forgotten, but there it is. Hiroki Morinu. So it's like a new sound at the end. And he is American born in Hawaii, but of Japanese descent. And he refers a lot to the traditional Japanese woodblock printmaking process, as well as the sumi ink paintings. And those are like the black to grayscale, what we would consider watercolor washes, but it's actually black ink. So, and this is a beautiful piece that talks about nature, and it kind of deconstructs it into like earth and water and flora and fauna, but through pattern and design. And it's called Pure Water. And then we have Barbara Takanaga, who was born in the US but is Japanese descent. And this is a series on the bottom left that she calls Angel Little Egypt, and it states, oh, I forgot to change that. One's 1, one's 2. I will fix that. But she loves to do these pattern forms that just kind of spread out. And this one reminded her of angel wings. And it's based off of a wing pattern from an Italian painting by Fra Angelico who lived from 1395 to 1455. But she takes a lot of inspiration from classical art, but then uses these repetitive patterns. She does a lot with lithograph and stenciling to create these abstract patterns that are based on what she sees in, not just in classical art, but in the world around her as well. So, and then the one on the right I think we're really going to be impressed with this when it comes, because this is stenciled linen pulp and acrylic on cotton and abaca base. So she does these very detailed and it's repetitive patterns, but they're also progressing and swirling. And a lot of her work is seen kind of as like this state of the world on a molecular level, or even like a vision of the universe from way far out. So kind of like with the sky section um, of the Richard Jolly piece, you've got those molecular elements coming together um, in these simplified forms, but in a repetitive nature that kind of makes it feel like a whole universe in one space. And her work sometimes considered optical art, so it gives you kind of this optical illusion. And we actually have her work in our collection. Some of you might remember the Novak collection of prints. We have a lithograph of hers, and it was on the canvas. I'll try to share that on the Docent blog at some point so you can see it. But it was a very bright blues and orange and peach swirling pattern of little dots. And so this is very indicative of her style, and it's kind of nice to see one of the artists who's already in our collection in a show of this magnitude. Okay, we are moving on to moving stories. So moving stories encourages viewers to reflect on the experiences of migration, both within Asia and beyond. And it's a little more than that. So the artists in this section coming up are usually artists who, like, at some point either moved to the US or came to study here, um, or they just progress their artwork in a way as well. But it's a lot about their stories and what they're trying to say about the Asian experience, not just in America, but overseas as well. So we're going back to Dinh Q. Lê, and like I said, he grew up in Vietnam during the Vietnam War, and then immigrated to the U.S. Later as an older child or adult. I believe it said late 70s, so probably teenager. So a lot of his work, the left side and then the top right, are the woven prints that we talked about, the woven photography. And the one on the left actually depicts a particular photograph by Associated Press photographer Nick Ute's iconic image of the napalm girl running down Route 1 after an aerial attack near the village of Trang Bang in South Vietnam. And so he takes this very somber and horrific moment of war and makes you not so much focus on the image itself, but more the feeling, by putting it on the grayscale and making it woven. And it's not as much in your face of what this is, but it still gives you that same feeling and emotion when you look at it. In the Docent tips thing that they sent out, they said to, when you're talking to younger audiences, maybe pick particular pieces and avoid some of the more violent scenes from his work. Um, but the piece down at the bottom is kind of a fun piece, and I think it's going to draw a lot of attention. This is a sculpture. It is a full-size tricycle with a cart with mirrors on it. And it is called I Am Large, I Contain Multitudes. It was made in 2009, but it refers to the American poet Walt Whitman's piece, Song of Myself from 1855. And the famous verse, I am large, I contain multitudes, talks about, how we see ourselves, and when we look in the mirror, and then when there's all these different mirrors reflecting the same thing, you still get different views and different perspectives. The notes here said that it went viral on Twitter in 2020 as individuals across the world came to grips with the complex, often contradictory emotions brought on by the pandemic. So it's going to be very current, even though it's over 10 years old. It's still going to strike a chord with your visitors to have them look at themselves reflected in these mirrors, and yet they still look different in every mirror, and they can still express themselves in different ways. And you can talk about perspective and how, even though everything's kind of facing them, it's still capturing different moments of who they are and what they're doing. So I think that'll be a fun one for the kids to see themselves in. So then we move on to Hung Lu, and she was born in China in 1948, but later immigrated to the U.S. as an adult in the 1980s. So she spent most of her childhood growing up in the People's Republic of China and under the Mao era influence. And she was actually able to study art while she was there, but she also did intense labor. It doesn't say what she did, but she has experience in that. But these are all self-portraits. And if you notice in the bottom corners, there's also an ID, and that is an actual ID of Hung Lu that she incorporated into these pieces. And they are all called official portrait, but have different subtitles. So the first one is proletarian. And the second one is immigrant. And then the third one is citizen. These were all done in 2006. So they're all reflecting back on her past life and the different avenues it took for her to immigrate from China to America during this time period. And the information on this is really interesting. They're all illustrations of self as she inhabited herself in different stages of her life. As a re-educated youth forced to perform backbreaking labor, as an immigrant in a new country, and as a global citizen who finally acquired a full set of rights. And so the IDs in these bottom corners represent those different stages of life as well, not just the portrait. But you can really see the transition from the first one to the third one, where she's really come into herself and grown as a person and has that self worth and self-awareness showing through in that final one. And these just really, 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 I think they'll really strike a chord with people when you point out that this is her life story in um, three self portraits. And then she also represents the stories of others, not just herself in her works, and really puts her voice to talking about immigration and refugees, and also the idea of wherever you end up, the people you are with, their story is also your story. Um, and so she was very inspired by the documentary photography of Dorothea Lange, and you'll see that name come up again. So I need to um, get you some information about her as well. But Dorothy Lange documented um, the labor workers in the U.S. in Mississippi in like the 1930s, and I was trying to remember the name of that show we had that kind of did the same thing, but the Walter um, Evans and Eudora Welty works of the labor. Um, why can I not remember the name of that? Anyways, the farm workers who, worked during the Dust Bowl and worked on southern farms after they weren't plantations anymore, but still, weren't. They basically still belonged to the property because they worked for nothing, just enough to get by and to say they were free. And so I think that really struck a chord with her. And so this last piece on the right is of a young boy, Clarence Weems, who was one of those farm workers in Mississippi. And I think Hung Lu kind of felt a connection to his story and her story, and how they were able to kind of leave their past behind, and through struggles, they were able to make a new life for themselves and claim their own personage as a right. So I encourage you to read all the info about her pieces, because she has a lot to say about coming into oneself, and I think it's a beautiful story. So we're going to move on to Roger Shimomura, and he was born in America in 1939 as third generation Japanese, right before World War II. So you can imagine the environment he grew up in, and at one point, his family actually spent 2 years in a Japanese internment camp in Idaho during the war. So the Japanese internment camps were where the U.S. military decided that they didn't trust anyone from Japan after Pearl Harbor. And so they were like, well, let's just round everybody up and keep an eye on them. And basically they were put into camps and watched over with the military, and they didn't have a lot of freedoms. There's a whole lot of info coming out now about what it was actually like to live in those and grow up in those. The actor George Takei actually grew up in a Japanese internment camp as well, and there's been a new musical made about what that was like and how that affected especially people of Japanese descent over the next several decades, and still today, even how people see them. So he did this series called Mistaken Identities, And these are lithographs, so they're not very big, but they represent different parts of Japanese life as he remembers seeing them in the internment camps. So, and the title of the series, let me see if I can see where it says that. So the lithographs mimic and recreate historical images of the camps, including censored photographs, also by Dorothea Lange. So that's where she comes in again as being very influential. And it's replicating those suppressed and forgotten images of grave injustices, in itself an act of commemoration and critique. Sorry, I've got a lot of noise outside my window that keeps distracting me. So there's a lot of images that kind of lurk in these images. Women and children dressed in kimonos, and the geta, which are the wooden sandals in that first one, are sitting on the porch. Scenes of domestic life, and yet they have like name tags on them to identify them. So they may at first seem like they're very traditional Japanese prints and representing very traditional Japanese people, but there's always that element in the background of, or in the foreground even, of the tag or the label that identifies who they are, the barbed wire in the background of the center one, as well as the one on the left has the barbed wire in the background. So the title of the portfolio, according to Shimamura, addresses the misconception that persists even today, as many Americans assume that people of Asian appearance are foreigners to this country. So then he did this other series that also represents the internment camps and as well as himself. And the two on the left, if you just were to look at them, you might think they were war scenes. But once you know their story and what they're about, these are the internment camps under watch by the U.S. government, by the U.S. military. So it's a little bit hard to see in the smaller images here, but it's people going about their daily lives in traditional dress. But there's this these ominous clouds overhead, and this sense of constantly being watched. So I need a drink. And the title of the series of the paintings references the date which will live in infamy, the speech delivered by President Franklin Delano Roosevelt one day after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. And the one on the left is called American Infamy, and then American Guardian is in the middle. And Shimamura asks us to consider our infamies, to consider other infamies committed against American citizens in the wake of that fateful day. And then kind of in contrast, the one on the right is a self-portrait of Roger Shimamura when he served as an artillery officer in the U.S. Army in the early 1960s. So it's kind of something to think about, like, as a U.S. citizen, who grew up in an internment camp during World War II, but then because of the mandatory draft in the 60s, he served in the US military. So I think that's kind of like this. It's very ironic to me, having grown up past this time, but it's also something that's very like sobering, like, oh, you know, the US kind of forgot how they treated everybody. And once you reach a certain age, you have to, serve your time in the draft as well. Um, but it also makes people stop and look at how um, he's portrayed, because like during the 1940s and 50s, um, especially in like cartoons and satires and stuff, people of Asian descent were often shown as still being the enemy. Um, and then in this image, Shimamura holds his viewers in a gentle yet steady gaze, as if asking whether they believe the authenticity of his portrait of patriotism. I think that is very telling, and it's very much one of those moving stories, like Hong Lu, whose like background, everything is very different from Shimamura. They both had to kind of establish that place of becoming, American, becoming Asian American, still holding on to their heritage, but also rising above how others could see them or could just place them into a stereotype. So, within the moving stories, we also have some other works that you may think could fall more into the abstract concept, but they actually go along with the story process. Do Soo from South Korea created a series of large-scale works. They're called portable homes, out of unconventional materials, and he would set them up around the world in different places. And some were made out of fabrics or paper. They were true to scale homes, architectural details, but they weren't like somewhere you could live. They were just art forms. They were fragmentary, and sometimes had see-through walls or staircases that led nowhere. And in this piece, this is actually kind of a miniaturized version of that. It's just a basic sits on the wall piece, but the process is very interesting. It's called Staircase, and it is embroidery thread that was embroidered on a gelatin tissue. So just imagine like a clear sheet that he did this kind of embroidery on, but it's just this messy threads together, but it still creates this sense of a staircase going into something. A swirling facade. And then he actually transfers that to paper. And so I think the gelatin kind of goes away, and it's just the threads sitting on the paper afterwards. So it'll be really neat to see in person. I'm looking forward to that. What was so it's kind of this surreal jumble of threads, yet delicate and fragile, and suggests that one's true home can only be conjured through memories and imaginations. So some of the questions they ask about this one is, what kind of feeling would you have going into a place like this if it was like an actual place? How would it make you feel? So this is another fun one, and I've got make sure I pronounce this right. Rukrit Terawanit. So this is a little bit hard to pronounce, but I'll send out some pronunciation guides on it. But Tira Vanit is usually how the last name is pronounced. And this is a Thai artist who was actually born in Argentina. So, like I said, people's backgrounds and heritages are all over the place, but they still harken back to the global ages concept of expressing one's heritage beyond what's laid out on the map. So it's kind of interesting that he focuses his works on types of maps. These aren't literal maps, but kind of how Hung Lu showed us her progression from laborer to immigrant to citizen. He shows us a progression of everywhere he has lived or visited. The one on the left is two different pieces, and I put the dimensions up there. They are 36 inches tall by 334 and a half inches long. So these will cover whole walls. I don't know if they're hung together or if they'll be separated. I think one of the concepts they were separate. But they have the same name, the Map of the Land of Feeling, number 1 and number 2. And they are inkjet print, offset lithography, chine-collé, which is layering paper within the printing process, and color silk screens. And the one in the bottom left, it's really hard to see here because it's shrunk down so much, but he uses his passport photos throughout the year and passport pages to create the purplish line that goes through the center of the whole piece. And so it's kind of documenting like where he was. And then the background papers are a wide range of materials. It's tourist maps, topographical maps, architectural drawings, journal entries, book covers, artworks that he was influenced by, as well as recipes that he's collected over the years. And this artist, you may have heard about him as in his famous curry recipe. He did an art, I guess it's more of a performance piece up in New York and other museums around the world where he would actually go in and he and other people and chefs would make curry, and then the visitors to the gallery would sit down and eat the curry, and their experience was the art. So it's kind of a fun conceptual idea. And I love that recipe is included in what he considers a mapping of the artist's life. So we'll probably find out so many more details once we actually get to see the pieces in person. And then the one on the right is part of that same kind of series, even though it's untitled. It has a lot to do with his notebooks and recipes that he's collected and telling his life story through this idea of maps and journal entries all being brought together, and can kind of see the arrows are creating like a path of where he's been and where he's going. Okay, so everybody good? We've got just a few minutes to try to get through this last section, which is Asia's Reinvented. So this highlights works that transform styles and motifs of traditional Asian art, but brings it into the contemporary and pop culture world. So I wanted to kind of start with these two because they're very contrasting images. Um, One is Manabu um, Ikeda from Japan. And this one's just entitled Iceberg, and it's an etching. Um, some people say that the waves on top of the iceberg are reminiscent of the famous artwork Great Waves by Hokusei in the 1800s. But what he really wants you to think about when you see this is the fragility of humanity against the power of nature. And so it is representing an iceberg, but it's not in the traditional sense that it's sitting in water, but it's kind of floating out in this universe. And then the one underneath it is Mariko Mori, and she is actually a very famous artist. Try to kind of describe her background a little bit. She's very much known for her not just pop art, but also her performance art. Like, she will actually dress up as characters from her art and go out and do performance pieces as them. And this doll represents one of those. There's a 3D media piece in which she dresses up as a futuristic virtual pop star. It's called Birth of a Star. And so this is Star Doll. This is a small version that represents that. And it talks about how when you look at it from a distance, it looks, all cute and put together. His cute little outfit and hair, and very reminiscent of like anime, which is a Japanese animation style. It's very popular. But then on closer inspection, everything's very cheap and poorly put together. And even the fact that she's held up on a stand reinforces the idea that it's just a mannequin, and all the gear she dons only adds to her vulnerabilities. So that one I think some of the videos will help you out on. But I think a lot of kids especially will be drawn to this one. So we're going to go back to June Kaneko. And you may be familiar with a piece like this. He is known for his monumental ceramic sculptures. And this one is just Untitled Heads. I forgot to add the dimensions on here, but I'll give them to you. They are 70 inches tall by 25 by 33 inches. So these are huge installations. And we're actually bringing in a special crane to move these pieces because they are fragile. They are ceramic. But they're also very heavy, so they have to be hoisted up onto their stands. He talks about how almost everyone reacts to a representation of the human head, no matter how crudely or minimally it is constructed. And one of the two heads looks like the Buddha or a totemic figure in general. and the other has no facial features and appears even more mythical and universal. The bright colors and geometric patterns make them more attractive, but it also adds and draws on the concept of them being more abstract as well. So then we have this other really fun piece, and I put the dimensions on here. This is 75 inches tall. It's the one on the right. And it's by 23 by 27. To put this in perspective, I am 56 inches tall, and this has got about 2 feet on me. So it's a pretty big, some people call it a teddy bear, but it is actually a tanuki. So it's called Untitled Tanuki. What a tanuki is it's a Japanese raccoon dog. It's a real animal. You can see it on the bottom left, but it is also kind of a, let me get the wording here. It is a mythical version of the raccoon dog, which has shown up a lot in Japanese folklore and is also considered a shapeshifter and known for its shape-shifting cunningness in traditional Japanese folklore. It's a prankster, and it can change itself into anything from a person to another animal. And it shows up a lot as well in Japanese pop culture. So one of the towns that, I was going to see if the name of that town is in this write-up. Yeah, Shigaraki. I'm not sure if I said that right, but they made a lot of stoneware pottery of this particular animal. I think the one in the bottom is similar to what they make there because it found it a lot on the internet. But he's also represented in things like Nintendo's Super Mario, where he dons a tanuki suit and gets special powers. My nephews love this. They always want to try to get the tanuki suit for their Mario characters. And then there's also a fun anime about a group of tanuki who are trying to preserve their secret sanctuary, magical sanctuary called Pompoko. It's a cute little story. It's very random and magical, but it's a lot of fun. But this one in particular, the large, colorful sculpture with the big eyes and a goofy smile is further enlivened by the bright, playful colors. I think it's in one of the other write-ups. But in this one, here it is. He actually says that the tanuki could take on the form of a Buddha, a singer, or as in this case here, a sake carrying boy that is common in the Japanese city of I'm tripping over this one. In the Japanese city of Shigaraki. So that may be why he's in this colorful, bright outfit. But I may have to do a little more research on that one. But I think people will definitely be drawn to this piece. So I encourage you to look up the tanuki and learn a little bit more about them. So also in Asia's Reinvented, we go back to Denkule. And this might be a good one to talk about with all age groups because it's a bringing together of two cultures. You definitely can see the Buddha face very prominent in this, but if you look, that center image up through the nose and forehead and across the brows is actually a crucifix. So it's kind of the pairing of his the religion of his heritage in Vietnam, and then American religion once he moved over here. So I think that'll be a good one to talk about and really be able to see that woven pattern in the piece. And then Hung Lu, let me get to my correct write-ups on this one. There we go. So, and Hong Lu also harkens back to like the traditional painting styles of literary art in China, where the painting must be accompanied by an elegant calligraphy and literary composition. And so you'll see the caricatures on the left-hand side, or the characters on the left-hand side, are part of an inscription replicating a fragment of I'm going to say this totally wrong, but I'm going to try it anyway. Wang Zizi, who was current from 303 to 361, and it's called the Orchid Pavilion Preface. It's a legendary work that embodies the ideas of literary art. The replicated verse celebrates the sheer joy of observing the exuberance of life on a clear and breezy day, and the sentiments resonate well with Lu's painting, the subject and style of which are decidedly more modern and non-elite. So it's taking that traditional inclusion of the Chinese poetry and the inscription on the actual art, but adding it to a more modern style of painting. And I think that's kind of what both of these pieces do, the butterfly dreams thinking and the crossing the river chasing. Okay. Takeshi Murakami is a very famous artist from Japan. And if you Google his work, you will find all kinds of fun stuff. So I'm going to kind of go through these a little bit quickly. So the character on the bottom left is called Wink, and is almost like, you might not think of it at first, but it's almost like a Buddha-like figure sitting on a little throne of flowers. But he also plays music, and I don't know for sure if we will have the music hooked up in the gallery on headphones. We might. I'll have to double check that. But he has multiple winking eyes that kind of represent the third eye of the Buddha, and he also represents the laughing Buddha. So he's just this fun little character that Murakami has created and uses in several of his artworks. But he was also, one of the things they point out is that he has a PhD in Japanese style paintings. So he does these fun kind of what people might consider frivolous pop culture kind of things, but he also understands the major concepts behind traditional Japanese painting. And in this one on the right, he actually represents, it's called Of Chinese Lions, Peonies, Skulls, and Fountains. So it's something that's done in a very traditional style, but it's using more pop culture's references. The archway is made up of skulls and flowers, and the lion represents it's a um, the Chinese lion represents a popular Buddhist and apotropaic evil deflating symbol in East Asia. So, in a lot of his works, you'll see him taking traditional ideas but incorporating them in such a modern way that you don't really see the tradition there if you don't know what to look for. He also does these things called super flat museums. And these are basically his way of breaking down the ideas of traditional elitist art and instead replacing it with pop culture. He uses a lot of anime. And he creates these little figurines based off his invented characters. You can see them on the right hand side. This is one I found on eBay. You can buy them on eBay, but you can also get them for auction on Christie's and I forget what the other one was, but these major art auction houses sell them as well. It's very interesting to just Google the Super Flat Museum. I did put a link in some of your material about the Super Flat, which is an art movement that he created. And so these are these little boxes. You could get them like in vending machines, and you open them up, and there's individually wrapped little figurines. They're miniatures of some of his designs. And in what does it say? In place of a instruction manual, you get like a little mini museum guide or gallery guide. So I think that's very fun. I don't know that we'll have them unwrapped. I think we mostly have the boxes and maybe one example, because they're worth more if you don't unwrap them. Mint in box condition. And so I think this one will be a fun one when we see what it actually looks like, to be able to talk about, like, how would you make your own mini museum? What would you put in a box and consider your museum? Okay, we're getting near the end, so I'm going to try to wrap it up. This is Akio Takamori, an American born in Japan. And get my notes on them. His let's see. They're known for their ceramic figures, but have kind of like a childlike charm and folk art charm, but underneath they're based off like historical images and have political undertones. The one in the middle of the two women, it's the material on it says that if you just look at it from the front, it just looks like two women, sharing a secret. But if you look at it overhead, there's more to the story, and you can form your own assumptions. So don't let the kids look at it overhead. I don't know. We'll have to see what it looks like when it comes. But it's pretty big. It's about 35 inches tall. So we'll just have to see what it's like. And the one on the left is a printed image of one of the sculpture pieces, but then it has a hand lithograph over top. So that's why it kind of has this 3D look, but also a printed look. So it's like a photograph that's been printed over top with a lithograph with the snake. And then they didn't give me much on the baby floating in the night sky, so we'll have to see if there's more info on that later. And then finally, we have Patty Warashina, and she is known for her funk art inspired ceramics. And these two prints are a rare yet remarkable work of hers in which she explores the issue of identity. So in both of the pieces, you have these very traditional references to Asian culture, to the floating lotus leaves, and the people in the water. And if you notice, she's very yellow except for a sliver of white on the side of her face. And I'm just going to kind of read this part here because I think it explains it a lot better than I can. The lotus leaves, a sacred symbol in both Buddhism and Hinduism, as well as a favorite plant in the gardens of Asia, appear bloody red, jagged, and ominous. The submarine that lurks at the corner deepens the sense of forbidden threat. So something you can ask people to do is see if they can find the submarine on that right side of the left-hand piece. With her stiff pose, arching fingers, and enigmatic smile, the floating figure seems like a nightmarish rendering of the Buddha. However, it is also a parodic portrait of the artist herself. She is bright yellow except for a crescent sliver of her face. Multiple conventionally Asian elements are cited here, yet their meanings are subtly inverted. The result is a hallucinogenic swing between injury and healing, serenity and violence. So I feel like this is one that you may get like questions about, and I think the best way to explain it is that it has to do with self-expression of identity, how she feels she is seen kind of above the surface, and also being immersed in her Asian heritage as well. Okay, and that concludes all the artists and works that we'll have in the show. These are just some of the programs that we're going to be having. Besides the opening reception and stuff, we have a Dine and Discover with Mary Laub, who is a contemporary abstract artist from UT, who talks about her Korean heritage and identity in an abstract art way. So that kind of relates to the first part of the exhibition with the exuberant forms. And then we will actually have a curator's talk with Chang Tan, the curator of the exhibition. She's coming to Knoxville to be in a symposium at UT and has offered to do a gallery talk for us on February 27th, which is a Sunday afternoon. And then we'll have the Global Asia's Community Day, and then a cocktails and conversation with Koichi Yamamoto, who is a printmaking professor at UT, and he will be talking about how he incorporates his prints into his kite work, which is really fascinating. Does anybody have any questions or comments?
It looks really good.
Yeah, it's a very busy show. There's a lot to look at. I like the fact that the educator's guide thing said just pick 2 or 3 pieces and really focus on them in depth, because I feel like if you try to show people too much of the show, it's going to be a little overwhelming on a tour. So definitely try to kind of pick your favorites or ones that will be fun to talk about and draw people's attention.
Delana, this is Sandy. I have a question.
Okay, Sandy.
Hi. The artists that you have laid out with their multiple themes, I have a question about when the exhibition is open, will it be grouped by artists and then the themes would be within each artist's collection?
No, it's the opposite. They should be laid out by theme.
Okay, great. So you'll have the in 3 areas.
Yeah, I'm hoping they're still doing that. I need to double check with Natalie, but usually what they do is they try to lay it out by theme first, because some of the artists are in multiple themes.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you.
Okay.
I have a question. As you were covering all of this, I thought about the Impressionists and how they knew each other when they were artists. Do we know if these artists with Asian influence know each other or have connections with each other?
I'm sure some of them do. Like whether they've actually met in person or not is another whole question within itself. But I think with the globalness of the art world at this point and how easy it is to like have conversations over Zoom or go to professional development online, I'm pretty sure they're at least aware of each other, and maybe some of them have collaborated or been to, like they might have had some of the same professors at different universities or gone to speak at conferences and stuff. So I'm sure there's some connection like that, but it's not, I don't think it's necessarily that they get together and talk about global Asias as their art form. I think it's more like with this exhibition, all these artists were in the collection, and then the curator Chang Tan drew different ones of that collection together when she saw the themes coming through. That makes sense.
It does.
Okay.
Delana, will we be having a walkthrough at all?
I can schedule one. I hadn't really gotten that far yet before the holidays. So yeah, we will definitely schedule like a practice walkthrough for the docents.
Delana, I have another question. Is there any opportunity for us to commemorate the World's Fair Park anniversary in conjunction with this exhibition? Because I believe this site was the Asian pavilion or the Japanese and even Thailand or Taiwan pavilion.
It was the site where the Japanese pavilion was. Yes, thanks for bringing that up. That is something I did want to point out. So the World's Fair is having its 40th anniversary this year because it was here in 1982 and now it's 2022 and it is the 40th year anniversary. And so, yes, it is kind of a fun aspect that the 1982 World's Fair, that the Knoxville Museum of Art was built on the site of the Japanese pavilion. So that is definitely a fun fact you can bring up on tours. And maybe I'll do a little write-up for the Docent blog, or if somebody wants to help me do a little write-up for the Docent blog, I take submissions. So yeah, that's definitely a fun fact to share.
Thank you.
Yeah.